In the vast ocean, a woman's body fell into the water, surfacing for a few seconds before her eyes opened in panic. Suddenly, Brandon woke up and realized it had only been a nightmare. He worked as a bodyguard for Ava, the governor's daughter, and for some time, he had been carrying the guilt of not being able to protect her mother. Brandon and Ava arrived at the airport, where Ava met her friends, Jed and Kyle. They were preparing for a trip together, and the boys were unhappy to learn that Brandon would be joining them. However, Ava explained that her father wouldn't allow her to go without protection. Once on the plane, Ava and her friends sat at the back to have some privacy. Ava couldn't help but notice that the flight had an unusually low number of passengers, which seemed strange. Shortly after takeoff, the plane shook lightly, but it was considered normal. However, shortly after that, the plane began to shake more violently, and the engine started to overheat. The pilot announced that they had accidentally collided with a flock of birds and there was nothing to worry about. However, the plane shook violently again, and one engine caught fire. At that moment, the pilot instructed passengers to fasten their seatbelts. As people began to fear for their lives, a part of the engine broke off and flew towards the side of the plane, killing one passenger. The crack in the fuselage caused a pressure change, and everything started flying wildly around the cabin. From falling handbags hitting people's heads to unbelted passengers being thrown from their seats, tossed around the cabin. In just a few seconds, a wall broke apart, creating a large hole in the fuselage, causing a number of people to be sucked out, dying in the dark void. Brandon tried to grab hold of a man floating nearby, but the wind was too strong, and he was swept away. Another person tried to cling to a seat, but the metal couldn't withstand the force, and a few seats fell out, with the man still hanging on. A flight attendant tried to save a passenger who was about to fall out, but in the end, she was pulled out with him. After losing most of the passengers, the plane began to fall rapidly, plunging into the ocean. Upon contact with the water, it immediately flooded inside. While Brandon was impaled by a piece of metal, the seats were pushed forward by the strong impact, crushing many passengers. The plane gradually sank over the next few minutes before finally coming to a stop, trapped at the bottom of the sea. Thanks to the angle of the plane, an air pocket formed in the back, allowing Ava, her friends, and flight attendant Danilo to survive. However, Kyle had a broken arm. The group stared at the water's surface, anxious about the strange sounds they were hearing. Suddenly, Brandon appeared, bringing Rosa and her aunt Marty to the safe area. Marty was unconscious, and Danilo immediately began performing chest compressions. After a few minutes with no result, Marty regained consciousness. Rosa asked about her grandfather, and Brandon had to tell her that sadly, her grandfather did not survive. The group began to panic, and Brandon quickly took charge to calm everyone down. This air pocket kept them safe for the time being, so they needed to stay calm and wait for the rescue team to arrive. Ava checked her phone, but there was no signal at the bottom of the sea. She pointed out that there was a hole in the plane and they should swim out, but Brandon explained that the chances of surviving such an attempt were very low, so they needed to stay and wait. Then, Hilo announced that the pilots must have called for rescue before the plane crashed, so help would arrive soon. Brandon explained that they should have backup oxygen tanks, and Danilo said the plane had 2 emergency oxygen tanks in the back. However, when checking, he found both tanks were empty. At that point, Marty remembered that a passenger had brought a medical oxygen tank. Brandon volunteered to dive down and find it. Before he left, Marty asked Brandon to bring her husband's hat. Brandon dove down, swimming through the aisle and checking the passengers who had died in their seats. He found Marty's husband's hat and took it but didn't notice something swimming near the window. Then, he found the oxygen tank and brought it along. Before checking the hole, Brandon decided to swim further, searching for anything else he could bring. But suddenly, he was attacked by a shark through the hole. The shark immediately bit Brandon, and he struggled with it, trying his best to escape. Meanwhile, the rest of the group began to worry as they noticed ripples on the water's surface, signaling something was happening. Suddenly, the ripples disappeared and Brandon surfaced, shouting for everyone to stay away, revealing the severe wounds on his body. Breathing heavily, he handed over the oxygen tank and the hat to the group, then apologized to Ava before being dragged back into the water. The group watched as the shark's tail surfaced, the creature continuing to feast on Brandon. Panicked, the group retreated to the crew area and agreed they needed to keep waiting, as Brandon had said. Marty volunteered to take care of Kyle's injured arm, explaining that she used to be a nurse during wartime and that's how she met her husband. Kyle screamed in pain as Marty pressed the broken bone back into place, then used thick magazines and bandages to make a temporary splint. A helicopter flew over the area near where the plane had crashed, searching for it. They were given priority because they knew the governor's daughter was among the victims, but they still hadn't spotted anything. Back with the survivors, they heard a cracking noise, and the plane shook for a few seconds, signaling it could drop at any moment. Jed began to have negative thoughts, and Danilo opened the oxygen tank that Brandon had brought back. At that moment, they saw the water turning red, and the noises made them realize that sharks had entered the plane, beginning to feast on the corpses. Suddenly, the plane shook slightly, and they saw sharks swimming past the window, banging into parts of the plane as they moved. Rosa started to panic, and Ava tried to calm her down, telling her not to worry, because she was certain they would be rescued. However, the helicopter still hadn't found anything, and the fuel was running low. The group continued to monitor the water level and estimate that they had about 3 or 4 hours left before the water reached the tail of the plane. However, they also heard metal creaking and noticed water leaking from the ceiling of the plane, making them unsure whether the plane would hold up until then. Suddenly, the plane began to fall, sliding down for a few minutes, causing debris to fall. However, it got stuck. And fortunately, the group managed to hold on, and no one was injured. But this new angle made the water inside the plane rise faster, as the ocean floor was clearly not as solid as they had thought. The group agreed that they had no choice but to swim out of the plane. They would need to find a way to distract the sharks, and Rosa mentioned that she had learned in school that sharks don't like bubbles. The only problem was that they couldn't hold their breath for that long. And suddenly, Kyle remembered something. Some passengers had brought diving equipment. Daniela explained that this equipment was in the luggage compartment, and there was a hatch that could give them access. But the oxygen tanks might be empty, otherwise, they wouldn't have been allowed to bring them on the plane. Ava thought that the remaining diving equipment could still be useful, but Jed was too pessimistic. So, Ava pretended she needed to use the bathroom and slipped inside, where she had a breakdown after hearing the plane's screeching sounds. When she came out, Ava reassured Rosa that being scared was normal in this situation. The helicopter only had 15 minutes of fuel left, and eventually, they spotted pieces of the plane floating around. 2 divers jumped into the water to begin their search. It didn't take long for them to discover the plane. As they got closer, the survivors started signaling through the window. One diver swam toward the hole, while the other approached the window to inform the survivors that everything was now okay. Suddenly, a shark appeared behind him, but he didn't notice, so the group tried to warn him. The diver turned around but didn't see anything. However, when he looked back at the plane, the shark pulled him down, and he died immediately after hearing several loud noises from above the plane. The group looked through the window and saw the diver's legs floating, drifting away. Remembering the diver, the survivors checked his area, but no one appeared, so they assumed he had died as well. The helicopter out there was almost out of fuel, and there was no choice but to leave. At least they had the coordinates, and the rescue team had been notified. Back with the survivors, Ava pointed out that if the diver was dead, they could take his oxygen tank. She looked down into the water and saw a shape, but couldn't be sure. Jed tried to get a better look by standing on a chair, but slipped and fell into the water. The group worries because he is nowhere to be seen, but then Jed emerges, laughing that he was just teasing them. However, he didn't surface quickly enough, and the shark quickly spotted him, attacking with its mouth full of sharp teeth. As Jed struggled with the shark, the group rushed over, trying to pull him out of the shark's mouth and get him to safety. Unfortunately, they discovered that Jed had lost a leg. Marty then asked Rosa to stand behind the curtain while she treated Jed's wound, using a safety strap as a temporary bandage. Marty makes a tourniquet to stop the bleeding, and Jed cries as he realizes he won't be able to compete in any more triathlons. However, he remained determined to escape. Ava volunteered to search for the diving equipment, and Danilo opened the luggage compartment. They found that the luggage compartment was also flooded, but Ava still dove down with a flare. She searched the area unaware that another creature was swimming behind the bags. Eventually, she found the diving equipment but was suddenly startled by an octopus. At the same time, the flare went out. The people on the plane began to panic when they no longer saw any light, but fortunately, Ava returned with the equipment. The group opened the bags and found diving suits and masks, but there were only 4 sets. They heard something hitting the plane and quickly rushed to the window. However, no divers were around. It was probably the shark. When they turned back, Jed was dead. Ava desperately tried to perform CPR on Jed, but Marty pulled her back, making her realize the truth. Suddenly, the plane began to slide again, but this time it stopped quickly because the cockpit had broken off, anchoring the plane in place. The water level was rising faster, and they needed to escape quickly. Remembering Rosa's cheerful information about sharks, the group planned to use the small oxygen tanks from the emergency mask to blow bubbles at the shark. The only problem was that they had to swim quite a distance. Kyle broke down, admitting that a childhood accident had traumatized him and made him a poor swimmer. However, with encouragement from Ava and Rosa, Kyle decided to give it a try. Ava then gathered all the oxygen masks she could find without diving too deep into the water. The sharks kept slamming into the plane, and the ceiling started to crack. The group began changing into their diving suits, and Marty volunteered not to wear one due to her age. She knew she would only slow the others down. After saying their final goodbyes to Jed, the survivors rushed into the water, noticing the plane was slowly starting to slide again. Suddenly, the cockpit completely shattered and fell into the abyss, signaling that the plane would follow. Marty instructed Ava to go ahead and take Rosa with her. The two girls started swimming through the aisle but immediately encountered a shark blocking their path. So, they opened an oxygen tank to drive it away. After the shark left, they continued swimming. Soon, Kyle and Danilo joined them. Marty stayed behind, watching the young ones pass by as the water level rose in the plane, knowing she wouldn't make it out in time. She stayed, waiting to be reunited with her husband. At that moment, Kyle panicked and swam back, keeping his head above the water in the small space left. Hilo tried to turn back to save him, but suddenly, a shark appeared from the cargo hold and attacked Kyle, devouring him in an instant. Panicked, Danilo swam quickly to join Ava and Rosa. They discovered the diver's body and took his oxygen tank so they could breathe. Then, Ava sent Rosa and Danilo to swim through the hole with the oxygen tank, but as she was about to follow, a shark blocked her path. Ava swam back and remained still, causing the shark to swim past her without noticing. However, its tail struck Ava's mask. Ava then noticed more sharks swimming through the hole, so she began swimming forward. At that moment, the plane started to fall faster. And the pressure of the water held her back, making it difficult to move. Luckily, Ava grabbed onto the seats and pushed through, finally making it out through the hole at the front just before the plane plunged into the abyss. Now, Ava could begin swimming up to the surface. However, she quickly ran out of air and lost consciousness. Her body stopped, but fortunately, the life vests pushed her up. When she reached the water's surface, Ava took a breath and immediately regained consciousness. Ava panicked when she couldn't see the others, but at that moment, the helicopter appeared and rescued her from the water. Daniela and Rosa had been rescued earlier. When Rosa asked about her grandmother, Ava had to deliver the bad news. As a final farewell to her grandparents, Rosa threw her favorite stuffed animal into the water before falling asleep in Ava's arms. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thank you for watching.